Welcome to Live DAF, your online DAF Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem and welcome back to today's DAF Hayomi, Maseches Bava Kamma DAF Chavtes. We begin on Chavches Amud Beis at the two dots, which are 9 lines off the bottom of the Amud. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'miskaven chayev b'she'ein miskaven potter. We have a fellow who stumbled as he was carrying some sort of container filled with liquid, splatters and breaks into smithereens. Somebody else comes along and slips on it and is harmed. According to Tue May, which is Rabbi Meir, the presumed Tue May, the container owner who dropped this thing is responsible for any resulting damages. Rabbi Yehuda, however, stipulates, well, it depends. If he did it intentionally, b'miskaven, then he's chayiv. Otherwise, he's potter. Now, there seems to be a machlekes here, right? Rabbi Yehuda says, well, it's limited to only a case where he intended on doing this, and otherwise he's not chayiv. Whereas Rabbi Meir holds, in any case, he's chayiv, right? So, what does intent mean? There are many ways to define miskaven. What exactly did he have in mind? Says the Gemara, what does Rabbi Yehuda mean when he said, well, if he's miskaven, then he's chayiv? Amar Rabba miskaven lo yirida lamata miksefai. Obviously, if he's trying to hurt somebody, he's chayiv. That's not the case. Is that he was unloading this container. Okay, he was miskaven lo yirida lamata miksefai. He's bringing it off his, shoulders, and as he's doing so, he sort of banged into a wall and it fell over, it broke, and it's there on the street, creating an obstacle. So this is called niskal pisheahu, as Rashi explains. Basically, according to Rabbi Yehuda, stumbling, tripping, bumping into things, that's not something you're meant to be doing, especially not when you're holding a container filled with liquid. Right? You must be extra careful, concerned that it's going to create havoc in the street. So, if he was not careful, it's like bordering on negligence. It's called niskal pisheahu. We treat it as a pisheah. He's being careless, and he's chayiv for any resulting damages. But if he was not unloading the barrel, he's just walking along and something happened and then he's not chayiv. That's Rabbi Yehuda's shita. Whereas Rabbi Meir seems to be more machmer, right? Amali Abaye. So Abaye turns to Rabbi Mechlalda Mechayiv Rabbi Meir. So you mean that Rabbi Meir holds that even if he's not unloading and something happens beyond his control, I feel a nifshara, even if it melted on his back, so he's going out on a hot summer day with this plastic container, and suddenly it's nowhere to be found, it's on the street. You mean to say even in this case he's chayiv for any resulting damages? That's Rabbi Meir shita. Amalei, he says, yeah. In mechayiv hayir Rabbi Meir, I feel it azna b'yadai. Even if the handle's still in his hand, it's just sort of like collapsed in his hand, he's chayiv. Why? Amai anasu. It's beyond his control. It's a total accident. It's not his gomer. V'aynas rachmana patra. We know the Torah exempts such cases. The girl was involved with the man, but it was against her will. She's not chayiv. Perhaps he'll say, when we have this patur of aynas, it's only pertaining to exempting you from chiyav misa, such as in the case of arayis. But perhaps when it comes to damages, you're chayvim by aynas, even aynas gomer. Really? Rabbi Meir holds that even an aynas is chayv by nezak, and vatani we have a brayso which indicates otherwise. Well, even Rabbi Meir is not so strict. The brayso says like this: Nishbara kadai v'lo yisilkai. He was walking down the street and he tripped and barrels on the floor broke apart and he did not sweep it up. Nafal gamle v'lo yamidai. His camel collapsed in the street. He didn't remove it. Somebody else comes along, stumbles on it, trips on it, and there is damage. Rabbi Meir mechayiv b'hazeikan. The owner is chayiv for any damages. I'm in potter. In this case, it's potter medin adam down here on this worldly court. You can't obligate him because he didn't do something outright to damage. It was he tripped. It wasn't really his fault. Mechayiv b'dnei shamayim, but in shamayim they hold him accountable. He should have cleaned up the mess. Okay, so it's only in this case where walking along and he tripped, then it's a question whether he's chayiv or not. But if it's a real oinus, everybody agrees that he's pater. Let's see. Even the Chacham agree with Rabbi Meir that in the following case he is chayiv, which is something which is closer to negligence, as the fellow who stumbled on the street. Ba'avnoi, sakina, yumasoi, a load, a knife, right? Shenicham rish gagi placed on his rooftop, carelessly, v'naflu b'rach metzuya, a regular, ordinary, typical gust of wind comes along and blows it off. V'zikon, they cause damage. Of course, he's chayiv, it's an outright pesheya. So Chacham agree on that, and likewise, Rabbi Meir agrees to the Rabbanon in the following case, where it's a true oinus that he's pater. V'malakan kanan al agag, he brings up these containers onto his roof to dry up. Almanas lenag. But enough, this hurricane comes along, uncommon wind, and blows them off Ezekiel, and they damage in that manner. Since it's an outright accident, shu pater, he's totally pater. So even Rabbi Meir agrees that an oinus is pater. So you can't learn otherwise in the Mishnah. Ela Rabbi says, I'll tell you the correct pshat. If it's a true oinus, of course, everybody agrees it's pater. Rather, you should know there are two elements to the machlekes in the Mishnah. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda argue and discuss and are chaylik on two separate cases that cause damage. Number one, pligi b'shas nefila. He's walking along and he trips, he bumps, and his thing came flying down and it strikes somebody as it's falling off his back. B'shas nefila. That's one point, one machlekes. Is he chayiv or not? Rabbi Meir says yes, Rabbi Yehuda says no. U'pligi l'achar nefila. Here comes another aspect of the machlekes. Suppose it's already on the street, in smithereens. And he says, you know what? I don't need it. I'm becoming generous. I'm being mafkir it. I'm leaving it there. And somebody comes and slips on it. Rabbi Meir says, chayev, it's your bur. A bur applies even to something which is hefker. Rabbi Yehuda says pater because a bur has to be owned. Okay, so the Gemara explains. Pligi b'shas nefila. The first machlekes regarding the moment that the thing dropped. Am I chayiv for that damage? Yes or no? B'niskal peishea. A person who trips, who stumbles. Is it held against him? Should have been more careful. Mar Sava, Rabbi Meir says, yep, niskal peishea. It's considered a peishea. What are you doing dropping things? Mar Sava, niskal lai peishea. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. No. So, if it was b'chavona, intentional, yeah, but just a trip, that's not your fault. That's one machlekes. Next machlekes applies after it already dropped down. Nobody was harmed as it was coming down. It dropped, it broke, and now he left it there, generously, leaving it for the public to pick up. And somebody comes in and slips on it. What's the machlekes there? Mafkir nizakav. If a person is mafkir, something of his that can create an obstacle, is that considered a bur for which the Torah obligates you? Mar savar mafkir nizakav chayiv. Rabbi Meir says yes. Umar savar pater. Rabbi Yehuda says pater. Rashi brings the whole sugi later. The bur has to be personally owned, as opposed to a bur of hefker. So basically, we're not discussing oinus, something which is an outright accident. We're speaking about sort of a iffy case. He slipped, he slid, he tripped, and he dropped this thing. Rabbi Meir says chayiv. Rabbi Yehuda says pater. Whether it happened as it was falling, whether it happened later and he was mafkirit, in both cases, chayiv contra Rabbi Meir, contra Rabbi Yehuda pater. Tue May, how do you know that the Mishnah discusses two different cases? Look, very pashut. Mediktani tartit. Mishnah describes two separate mediums of damage. First, the Mishnah discusses a fellow who slipped on the water. That's one aspect of oisha loke b'chars. So a person, was struck by the broken thing. Hainu it's pretty much one and the same case. Why do we have to sort of, itemize these? Apparently, the Mishnah is alluding to two separate points in time. The first describes as it was falling, boom, there goes the water, and somebody slipped on it. So that was a direct result of the thing falling, as it was falling. He got struck by these shards. That's talking about after the fact. It's sitting on the floor, and this fellow fails to clean it up. Now, the fact that the Mishnah clearly discusses two separate instances, and the machlekes therein. Likewise, the brisa that we had a minute ago between Rameh and the Chachamim with the camel, with the is alluding to two separate possible scenarios. Either damage occurs as it was collapsing or later on. Now, so regarding that first, case number one with the container that broke and so we can have both types of applications. It could have damaged as it was falling or afterwards when it was broken and it caused slippage. But what about the camel? So basically, regarding the container, you can hold him responsible whether he wasn't careful as it was falling, he tripped and let it fall, or later on he was not interested in cleaning it up. But regarding the case of the camel, why are you going to hold him responsible for both type of damages? I can understand very well that he's responsible for something that happens after the camel collapsed and he failed to clean it up. He made it in a hefker, and that's a burn. And like we said before, you're responsible. But if a damage occurred as the camel was collapsing, what do you want from the owner? Am I in charge of my camel's life? He took it through a precarious route. He took it through the water. Derech Sarata Denahara. Really, the water, the river sort of overflowed. He wasn't careful from taking it through a flooded area. Of course it tripped. So you're responsible for that too. Now, Hechadami, what exactly is going on? There's another route to take. Peshayu, he's an outright careless fellow. Of course he's chayev. That's not part of our discussion today. We're talking about accidents and trippings and fallings. This guy's an outright mazik. If there's no other route and this is the way everyone's taking, so what do you want to do? Why is he even chayev? Oh, so it must be like this. Why is he responsible for his camel's tripping? The ask, what happened was the owner tripped. He was walking and he tripped. The camel tripped on him. So now he's responsible for the actual act of falling, so to speak, and that explains the price. So once again, we have two possible applications of hesed, either during collapse, whether it's a container, whether it's an animal, or, as we said, there's another point as well, after it, it's there and it creates a bar, and the owner was mafker that material. Rabbi Meir says, you're still chayiv, it's your bar. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. B'miskaven chayiv. B'she'ein miskaven potter. Now, mafker nezakav, my miskaven ika. With respect to responsibility for your material sitting in the street. Right? So Rabbi Meir says, you're chayiv, even though you are mafker it. And Rabbi Yehuda says, well, you're potter. Miskaven yichai. What do you mean miskaven? How does miskaven play a role with the material on the street? It's already sitting there. Amar Rabbi Yosef means like this. But miskaven liskus b'charsel. Means like this. If he intended on reacquiring those shards, so they're his, it's no longer hefker. Now Rabbi Yehuda says yichai, but if it's really hefker, you're potter. That's what he meant to say. V'chein Amar Rav Ashi, the same teretz. Miskaven liskus b'charsel. Okay. Rav Lazo Eimer, regarding this machlekes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, I want to explain to you. B'shas nefila machlekes. Machlekes only pertains to damage occurring as the item is fallen. Aval nachal nefila mai. So now he asks the Gemara, so what do you mean after it falls, sitting on and somebody slips on it? What happens there? Did you have koil pot? You mean to say, according to all shitas, your potter? What do you mean? Vayikra Rabbi Meir de machayev. Rabbi Meir clearly speaks about a fellow who failed to clean up his mess. It says, his thing fell down, he didn't clean it up, his camel, right? So he's chayev for subsequent damage. Elamai. So maybe the other way. Rabbi Lezer meant to say that if it happened after the fall, everybody agrees you're chayiv. Well, Vayikra Rabbanan the Patri, of the Rabbanan who say you're Patri, we had in the Brisa, right? Elamai. So it must be Rabbi Lezer meant to say like this. B'shas nefila, when he said that there's a machlekes b'shas nefila, b'shas nefila. He's trying to point out that, despite the fact that the lashon in the Brisa perhaps indicates that the discussion only pertains to post-fall damages. No, you should know, and we proved this in our Mishnah, that there are two separate possible scenarios which could have brought about damage. Elamai b'shas nefila means b'shas nefila v'kamashwan k'led Abayi, and Rabbi Lezer is simply concurring with Abayi that in fact there are two separate possible scenarios here. The hezek could have happened during the nefila. That's one machlekes, where the niskal is called Beisheya. And it could happen later on when he was mafker and sitting in the street and causes havoc. Question there is whether a burr pertains to something that you are mafkir. Okay, so that's pretty much summarizes the Amar here. We have two separate discussions, two separate machlekes. Rabbi Yehuda Amar, la'achan nefila machlekes. You should know the discussion only pertains to post-falling. Aval b'shas nefila, but during the actual fall. Mai, what does Rabbi Yehuda mean to say? Did I call potter? All agree you're potter? What do you mean? What happened to niskal poishea, which according to Rabbi Meir makes you chayav? Rabbi Yehuda himself seems to hold that way. Later on, the Kamman, he says, "Lo yitem masnisin." Rabbi Meir, we have a Mishnah there with some sort of collision in the street, and you're chayiv. Don't think it's only Rabbi Meir speaking. Rabbi Meir, the Amar niskal poishea, that allowing oneself to stumble out of carelessness is called a poishea, and therefore he's chayiv. Poishea. Don't think it's just Rabbi Meir. Everybody agrees. Well, it's a discussion later. We'll see Be'ez Hashem in a couple of days. Bottom line is, Rabbi Yehuda clearly alludes to Shitas Rabbi Meir that niskal poishea. B'shas nefila, you're chayiv. Mechlal de Rabbi Meir, mechayiv. So that can't be the pshat. Oh, so perhaps Rabbi Yehuda meant to say, any damage that occurs b'shas and nefila, you're responsible for it? No, there's a machlokes. From the very fact that Rabbi Yehuda alludes, later on to Rabbi Meir being the one saying chayiv. Lo yitem masis Rabbi Meir. Don't think that Mishnah that you're chayiv for collisions is Rabbi Meir. The Amar niskal poishea, colliding and tripping is an act of carelessness. So Rabbi Meir seems to be the one holding that shita, not the Rabbanan, right? Mechlal de Bati Rabbanan. Apparently Rabbanan exempt you. So we can't say, it's universal. It's subject to machlokes. So what did Rabbi Yehuda mean to say when he said, well, the machlokes is la'achan nefila? Elo k'mashmona means to say like this. Of course, the machlokes pertains to b'shas nefila. That revolves around the question of niskal poishea or not. And the machlokes pertains to la'achan nefila, because, as we said, Rabbi Meir holds, even if you're mafkir the nizakav, you're chayiv. And Rabbanan say, no, you're potter. But Rabbi Yehuda was coming to highlight something very important. Allah kamashmon. This case here is the only reason why the only case where the Rabbanan say, well, you're mafkir, you're broken material, you're potter. Allah kamashmon, the mafkir nizakav, the hacha with the potter Rabbanan. The honest Rabbanan say, in this case, he left his stuff in the street, he's mafkir it, okay. You are honest because according to Rabban Niskal La Poishea, you're not accountable for tripping and all. So if you let it be, you're potter. Aval mafkir nezak of the alma machayev. Well, let's say a person actually places something, intentionally in the street. It's a straight out Poishea. And he says, no, I'm leaving it here. Free for anybody to take. Mafkir it. It's an outright bar, you're chayev. So Rabbi Yehuda is just pointing out one thing, which the other Shita does not point out. He seems to be disagreeing with Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi. He holds that it's not so simple that if you're mafkir nezakav, you're potter. The Rabbanan say you're potter only over here because it's sort of a combined effort. We have two factors. It was initiated by sort of an accident, and then he left it. So he's not chayiv. But if he actually deliberately places an obstacle, it's his bar. Even if he was mafkir, he's chayiv. No, here comes the discussion. Mafkir nezakav. A person actually places something in the street, nezakav, something that has potential to cause damage, and he makes an after. No longer looking after it. So we just concluded that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're chayiv. But the Gemara is sort of going to go into a whole back and forth until later on the Gemara will conclude as such. We have machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Lazar. The same machlokes we had a minute ago. Chadam are chayiv, chadam are potter. One says chayiv, one says potter. Ultimately, we're going to come out that Rabbi Lazar says potter. Rabbi Yehuda says chayiv, as we just concluded, but we have still a little bit of a journey till we get there. So we're not really sure yet who says what, right? Chadam are chayiv, chadam are potter. Let's suggest. Man machayiv k'Rameir. The one who says chayiv, it's like Rameir. Even if you're mafkir your materials, you're chayiv. Man the potter, the one that says potter, Rabban, it's following the Rabban that you're potter. No, says the Gemara, leave it to Rameir. All agree that Rameir would say you're chayiv in this case. There's no question. Because even when you trip and you break that stuff and you leave it out there, you're chayiv. Certainly when you deliberately place it there to begin with, you're chayiv. Keep pleading, leave it to Rabban. The machlokes amarayim here actually pertains to Shitas Rabban. What did Rabban hold in this case? When you place something b'pshia and you left it here. Man the potter Rabban. The one that says potter, it's like the Rabban who say that if you make it hefker, you're potter regardless. Uman the machayiv, whereas the Shita that says chayiv, Amalach will tell you, even the Rabbanan agree this is different. This is an act of negligence. I'm going even with the Rabbanon. Ad kan loik pater Rabbanon. You know the Rabbanon only exempt to ela b'mafker nezakav. Only in our Mishnah. True, he made his nezakim hefker, but you know what? Let's remember what happened. He tripped. It was an oinus. He didn't actually create it as a bar. So he's pater. Ava mafker nezakav the alma mechayim. Of course, if a person places his nezakim out there, even though he makes an hefker, it doesn't matter. He's chayim. So again, contra Meir, in all cases, you're chayim. Contra Rabbanon, well, in the case of an oinus, you're pater. Whereas in the case of B'pshia, that's where we have this machlekes. What happens if you mafkin nezak? Now, we don't know who said who. Rabbi Lezer or Rabbi Yehuda, right? To stayim, you can conclude that Rabbi Lezer the Amar Chayiv. Rabbi Lezer is the one who says Chayiv. At least initially, that's what we figured. Later, we're going to switch it. Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Lezer quotes Rabbi Shmuel, his Rabbi Shmuel, Shnei Dvarim Einan B'shus Shaladim. So Rabbi Lezer, right? He quotes Rabbi Shmuel that there are two things that are not really in your possession. You don't really own them. The Torah considers it like it's yours with respect to looking after it, with respect to attributing responsibility to you. That's what you own it for. Ve'elohein. What are these two things? A pit in the street. Is it yours? No, it's not your property, but you have to look after it. You created it, you're responsible. It's as if you own it. The chametz. Second thing is chametz. Starting from chatzos on Erev Pesach, you can't enjoy the chametz. You can't have a nod. For all practical purposes, it's not yours. It's ownerless. And if you own it, you're not really owning it. You have no financial interest in it, right? But the Torah considers it yours with respect to the fact that you are now transgressing the Isser of owning chametz. Okay, so bottom line is, here we have Rabbi Lezer, who's telling us that really a bur is not yours, in terms of practical, monetary terms. So clearly, a bur which is hefker is still your business. It's a clear raya. Says the Miyam Rabbi Lezer Achi. Is that so that contra Rabbi Lezer, even an obstacle which is hefker is still your responsibility? Rabbi Lezer tells us, if the other way around, it's not. So there's some animal waste in the street. This fellow walks over to it and sort of turns it over and handles it. So now it would seem like it's, like he made a kinyan, like it's his, and he left it in the street. Another person comes along and is harmed. This fellow has to pay for it. But Rabbi Lezer comes and explains. That's only because the second guy who went over and was haifech the golo, right? The first guy put it out there, but the second guy came and was haifech it because he had kavanah to be zoicha. So it's his. He's responsible. But let's say he had no kavanah to be zoicha. He was just playing with it. He wasn't, potter. Then he's potter for any damages. So clearly, Alma, what do we see? Mafkin azaka potter. Unless the obstacle is yours, you're potter. So that's a stira. Because here we see that you're potter, whereas previously it seems that Rabbi Lezer holds, even something which you don't really own, you're still responsible for. Amar Vada Bar Ava, no, it works perfectly. This is totally different. Typically, even if you don't own it, you're chayav. But here, what happened was, he didn't actually create an obstacle. The obstacle was there. It was a pre-existing bird. There was a pile of gulal in the street. He just came over and sort of flipped it over. And he put it right back. So he didn't do anything. Of course he's potter. Amar Avina, Mashal Deravat Barav. I'll give you an analogy. A similar case to this story. What's it comparable to? Imagine a person walking down the street. Sees an open pit, dug by somebody else. A true obstacle. So he decides to be a nice fellow, covers it. And then he goes and uncovers it. Of course he's potter. Likewise, in our case, the galal was there, the obstacle was there. I just picked it up, I put it back down. Of course, I'm potter. I restored it to its original state. No. See, Esther Ravina, how could you compare the two things? When I see an open pit and I uncovered it, when I covered it, I didn't undo the pit. I didn't undo what the previous fellow did. So now when I remove my lid, I just took away what I put there. I'm not responsible for the pit which I didn't dig. As opposed to the fellow with the golol, he did redo it. It was sitting on the floor, he picked it up. Which basically obliterates the obstacle. It renders it non-existent. Then I go put it down again. I created the obstacle. Of course I'm chayiv. Why not? Holodami. You know what it's comparable to? Imagine a person finds an open pit. He fills it. No pit. Then he goes and redigs it. Of course he's chayiv. Of course he's responsible because he did it. Because when he filled it, he undid the previous person's act. Now it's his responsibility. Here as well. With the galal, I'm responsible. Elam Rav Ashi, I'll tell you why I'm not. He picked it up very, very low, less than 3 tfachim. We know that within 3 tfachim it's considered like connected, lovely, right? So it's not a change of location, it's still in its original state. So bottom line, Rabbi Lezer learns that the reason why this fellow with the haifach as hagalol is chayev, because he had kavanah to be zoicha. Okay, so if it's his, he's fully responsible, because otherwise if he had no intention to acquire this waste in the street, he wouldn't be chayiv merely by simply picking it up, because he just picked it up and put it right back down in its original location, and it was within 3 tfach. Now, how did Rabbi Lezer know that the Mishnah is discussing such an interesting case? Where you put it, right back, he didn't pick... Why did Rabbi Lezer have to learn the Mishnah this way? He picked it up very low, and therefore he's only chayiv if he had kavanah to be a zoicha, then it really is. But if he had no kavanah to be zoicha, it's not really his, nor did he change his location, so he's pater. Why do you have to learn the Mishnah in this interesting way? Why don't you just learn simply? The reason why the Mishnah is chayiv is because he lifted it up way up in the air, beyond 3, changed locations. So even if he had no kavanah to be zoicha, he's still chayiv because he made a bar. Amar Rava Masnisin Kashise. Because look at the wording of the Mishnah. That prompted him. My area hafach. Why does the Mishnah pick the word hafach? Which sounds like he just made a little flip on the material. Listen to Yigbiyah. Rather than saying he lifted it. Elosh Ma'minal. You know why? Because kol hafach, when it says hafach, it means lamata mishlesha, within 3 tfachim. Okay. Now, Rabbi Lezer Amachayev. We've just proven that Rabbi Lezer holds that even if you don't own the obstacle, you're chayiv. We had the halacha, the name of Rishmael, right? Things that you don't own, the Torah considers it yours. So we see that you're chayiv even for something you don't own, because you created the obstacle. So Rabbi Lezer says chayiv. Remember, there was a machlokes. Who was Rabbi Lezer's opponent? Rabbi Yechon. So if one says chayiv, the other one says pater, right? Rabbi Yechon Omar pater. Rabbi Yechon says that an obstacle which is hefker, you're not responsible for. Umi Rabbi Yechon hachi. Really, Rabbi Yechon says so. But tonight we have a Mishnah on which Rabbi Yechon gives an explanation which doesn't seem consistent with this. A person put away some thorns, some glass. He sort of hid it in the street. He lives next to the street and he puts a fence all along, the street made of thorns, no less. Or he has some other, stone wall that collapsed into the street. In all these cases, somebody got damaged, he has to pay. It's only a concern el mafriach. Right? We speak about a thorn fence at the edge of his property. It's only a problem if he's mafriach, if he sort of directs the thorns into the street. But let's say he's right on the boundary and it's right in there. It's not sticking into the street. I'm not chayiv if somebody bumps into it. My time of potter. Why am I potter in this case? I put an obstacle right by the street. Because it's mine. So apparently the only time I'm chayiv for bar if it's in the street. And it's not mine. Alma mafkin is agav chayiv. So clearly, I'm chayiv for a bar which is not mine, which is hefker. If Rabbi Yechon says that if I put a thorn fence at the edge of my property, And Rashi says, "Afakav the hifke rishusay." Even if I allow the people to walk on that spot, so the rishus is part of rishus rab. But since the thing is mine, I'm not responsible. The only time I'm chayiv is if the bur is hefker. Alma mafkin zakav chayiv. So perhaps Rabbi Yechon holds that if the bur is hefker, I'm pot. I'm only chayiv if the bur is mine. Oh, so why am I not chayiv for my thorn fence? My time potter. There's a special reason for that. You know why? You have no business bumping into my fence. We have an explanation on this halach. It's not the practice of people to bump into walls. It's chacham b'ksalim. So this fellow who's bumping into my wall, he is the strange fellow. I'm not responsible. Says the Gemara, that when you make your nizak and putter, you're not chayiv as bar. Rabbi Yechon tells us halach is Mishnah. We have to follow the anonymous Mishnah. And we have a Mishnah which says you're chayiv. It's an chayiv bar is a rab. And a person digs a pit in the street, it's hefker. Everything falls into I'm chayiv. Umay is chayiv. And Rabbi Yechon tells us to follow the Stam Mishnah. Ella, let's go back and switch the whole equation. Ella, Rabbi Yechon chayiv. Rabbi Yechon is the one who says that hefker is chayiv. With Rabbi Yechon chayiv, and the fact that Rabbi Yechon says chayiv indicates Rabbi Lezer I'm a potter because he's the disputant, right? Question is, what about that quote? V'amar B'lezer, Mishum Rabbi Shmuel. B'lezer quoted Rabbi Shmuel that even something which doesn't really belong to me, like a bar, is attributed to me. I'm responsible for it. So clearly, I'm chayiv even for hefker. Answer is, it doesn't really reflect Rabbi Lezer's personal shita. Like Ashi, Hadidei, Hadirabi. That was a quote from Rabbi Shmuel's Rabbi, but he himself personally holds that no, hefker is potter. Okay, so in conclusion, a fellow walking down the street, niskal, he trips, holding some container, falls down, breaks, creates an obstacle. Rabbi Meir says, niskal pesher yuchayiv. Likewise, if it fell down and you mafker it, somebody trips on it, you're chayiv as well. Rabbi Yehuda says in both cases you're potter. But Rabbi Yechon explains that the patur is only when it happened through some sort of accident. But if he actually puts something out there, and then he makes it hefker, that's like a regular bar upon which you're fully responsible. All the best to you and Hatzlacha Rabbah.